At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Do you know this place?
I want to say yes.
Go in there, just go in there.
For you. I want to.
I haven't slept at all. Is there a direction that you feel drawn?
I'm going to go wherever you go. You know that. You're scaring me a little bit.
I feel like you know.
Won't let anyone near them. This crowd back in the corner. Violent. I've never seen the parents behave so.
They can get very protective.
The water before you is somehow special. It is better than anything you've ever tasted. Each drink is better than the last. Take a drink now.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Ben Buckingham.
Hello, everybody.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Jim Laczkowski.
I could be a starling.
We continue Sci-Fi July with a film from 2013, Shane Carruth's Upstream Color, the story of a woman who is drugged, robbed, and becomes soulmates with a pig. And no, I'm not talking about Shane Carruth himself, in a complex hypnotic film about cycles, trauma, and chains. We are going to be spoiling this film as much as it can be spoiled, so if you don't want anything ruined, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen it. You really need to see this film. Let me just say that right now. We will still be here when you come back. So, Ben, when was the first time you saw Upstream Color, and what did you think?
I'm not 100% sure which year it was. It was probably 2013, but it might have been 2014. It was the Melbourne International Film Festival. It was at the old Greater Union Cinema in their really massive one that sat like 800 people, big screen, old school, like 70s, 80s built place. And me and my mate went and sat dead center, front row, and just like completely swallowed up by the whole experience. And we loved it. I'd seen Primer 10 years previous to that and had been waiting eagerly for this film because it took a while to get to Australian shores. And yeah, absolutely adored it at the time.
And Jim, how about yourself?
I saw it at the Music Box Theater here in Chicago, Illinois. I believe it was opening weekend when it came out in 2013 with Shane Carruth in attendance for a very interesting and insightful Q&A And my initial reaction, well, I was like, okay, all bets are off. This is everything I want from cinema, pretty much. And I know I'm prone to hyperbole, but it has become over time one of my favorite movies for a lot of reasons that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I mean, that first viewing, still, I was disoriented and dazed and completely unsure of what to think about what it all meant, and even what Carruth's intention was, especially on first viewing, because, you know, it's just something you have to watch multiple times, I think, and to really let it sink in. But this is just everything I want from an intellectual movie experience, and I want something that surprises me, that gets me out of my comfort zone, and this is all of that and more. So we'll dive right into exactly why I think it's pretty much a masterpiece, but I have reservations that you may or may not have alluded to early on in your intro there, Mike.
I saw this one on video for the first time, probably in 2013, maybe 2014, because it used to take a little while longer for things to come to VHS or DVD. It was probably DVD at that time, 2013. And I'm pretty jealous of you guys having seen this in a theater. I don't know why I didn't see it in a theater. I liked Primer. I didn't love Primer, but I liked Primer. I don't know what it was about Primer, but I didn't have any problems really following it. I don't know if I just locked into the rhythm or whatever, but I was like, oh, this is brilliant. But then when people were like, oh, it's so confusing and they're making maps and stuff, I'm like, I didn't really need that. It was cool for Mulholland Drive. If you want to make me a map of Mulholland Drive, sure, feel free. This film also, when I got into it, I was a little confused watching it, but then at some point I had this aha moment and I just said, oh, all right, it's all starting to make sense. What's happening between the worms and the people and the pigs and the flowers. I'm just like, okay, it's all coming to me now. And when it was done, I was breathless. I am right there with you, Jim, as far as this feeling like a really perfect film. Just everything about it just really clicks for me. I know I'm going to say the word hypnotic. I'm going to say the film washes over you. All those types of things are absolutely true. I think a lot of that has to do with the music, which is very lulling. He uses music so well. He composed the fucking music. Carruth really fits into that auteur model of he stars in the film, he wrote the film, he directed the film, he did the music for the film. I don't know if he edited the film. I need to look at the credits again. The editing style goes so well with the music, which goes so well with the shooting style, the whole use of a very narrow depth of field so many times, and just how he uses focus, how he frames things. Everything in this movie fits together so well for me, like this beautifully crafted puzzle, and you can go back and you can just get more and more out of it every single time. Like, as I'm writing my notes last night, I'm getting embarrassed because I'm writing "wah" in the notes. I'm just like, look at that shot. This is so perfect. Everything comes together in a beautiful, beautiful way in Upstream Color.
Yeah, he wrote the score. This is very unconventional, I think, but he wrote the score while writing the script, which is not something I think most filmmakers do. And I don't know if that just led to the music being so complementary to everything going on, but it does have this fluidity and this rhythm that makes this movie really as much of a visual experience, but an auditory one, where you get really sucked into the sound design, the ambient stuff, and even just everything involving what the sampler does is very like Barbarian Sound Studio or Blowout to some extent. I eat that stuff up as somebody who really loves sound design. Everything you're saying is I completely echo and still love this movie. But I read some interesting articles in light of Carruth as a person, and I don't want to lean into this too heavily because, again, we have to separate the art from the artist, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast when you want to analyze a work of art. But at the same time, there's a part of me that wonders whether, consciously or not, if Carruth made this film about leverage and power and inflicting psychological trauma as a window or a mirror of his own tendencies. Now, that's just like me hypothesizing, but at the same time, I can't help but think of how people are saying these days, well, instead of going to therapy, men do this. Well, instead of going to therapy, maybe Carruth created this work of art as his outlet in a way. But again, like that's just something that would never have occurred to me early on with early viewings. Now it's just something I'm thinking about without it overwhelming me to the point of like, well, I can't love this movie anymore because of learning about what Carruth has done as a person. That's just something I wrestle with a little bit now.
In the case of this film, denying the connections to Carruth's own behavior and his choices is to deny the way that Upstream Color functions. That the film itself is built upon the significance of these parallels and connections between diverse aspects of existence and life. And so it's almost like you're just like cutting out, there is no disconnecting it, because the whole film is connections, which is kind of like, yeah, he did too amazing a job that he like kind of cursed his own film that I can't separate it. And I think it is important. The same way that the sampler is both like seemingly a good person and a bad person, that the film is juggling a lot of these things without necessarily praising or damning. And because of the parallels and connections, because he is so central to it, that it has to be part of it. Can't think of many films that I would describe as holistic filmmaking. That it's definitely because Carruth is so central to so many artistic and technical aspects that it does feel holistic, that every part is important and essential.
And an extension of him, too, as a person.
He injects his previous film, a topiary that didn't come to fruition. He injects that in there, having Chris work on that as like an effects supervisor or producer, it looks like. Having Chris be played by Amy Steinmetz, who's his significant other at the time, having him in there, and having him as Jeff. Jeff's pretty much a jerk.
Oh, yeah.
He's a terrible person. I'm just like, yeah, how much are you holding this mirror up to yourself as you're doing this? Because so much of this feels like such a personal extension. To have also, like you said, to have the sampler there, he is creating music, and he's creating the music that we hear in the film, which is pretty amazing as well. I mean, the montage of him creating these sounds and using these sounds to form a song from that, and that we're hearing all of that being created at the same time. And then just the reliving of things, I mean, the whole movie is about reliving trauma. I mean, is he showing us a cycle at some point inside of his own life? Or is this just kind of, an extension as far as like, this is what trauma does. I have this trauma, maybe not knowing that he's expressing that trauma through abusive behavior.
Yeah, there's a Q&A he gives that Vivian Sobchak talks about in her film comment article, where he was asked, what is this about? And he said, I don't know. And I was like, yeah, I would say based on the little bit that we know that, yeah, he doesn't know, that he wasn't at a point where he was able to recognize how much you can watch this film with the lens of knowing the allegations of domestic violence and see how much it's there, how difficult it is to watch in places because it feels like so much of a controlling, not okay person exerting a lot of influence and power. But the film is also querying that and attacking that in other ways, not necessarily through himself, but through the thief. It's always difficult to psychoanalyze a person in a film because you don't have everything that you may need to do that fully, but it does feel like it's somebody breaking apart all the parts of their personality and putting them into different sections. And the reason why Upstream Color works so well still is because those parts also connect really powerfully to the bigger social and political sphere of how systems function to control us and direct us and take away our power. And so it becomes this really complex, multi-layered parable that I said that I loved this back in the day. I don't remember much of what I felt or thought about it, but returning to it now, I had a lot more of a complicated experience. And I think after watching it for the second time ever last week, I didn't like it. And then digging into some reading materials and ruminating on it, I didn't rewatch it again at first for the third time. I actually put it on with some Bluetooth headphones and went outside and collected wood for the fire. It's the only thing we have for heating is a fireplace. And it was a very powerful experience to experience it like that. Just listening to the sounds and the dialogue and the movement of it and feeling it while I did actions like occur in the film.
I was going to say, you're Henry David Thoreau right there.
I was just going to say that too, yeah.
Yeah, and that did sort of like shift out some of the things which I was probably having more difficulty with. And it was like, again, sort of made me return to it as this holistic thing, which even though it is, all the parts are so important, they are all, moving. And it's okay to like not sit with them sometimes and sit with other parts. And then I rewatched it a third time, actually watching it. And again, sort of came and went with how I feel about it. But it was like, it felt like reading through some of the things that people have written about it, heavy theory and casual viewers, like watching it the third time was, properly the third time, was like, felt like running my fingers through soil and like feeling all the parts of the soil and the bits of matter decaying or stones and things and like getting ready to plant something. Like the film feels like fertile soil. And I don't know still how I feel about it now, but I love how much has grown out of it.
Yeah, I completely echo what you're saying in terms of having a complicated relationship with it, while also acknowledging the fact that I still feel deep down that it is a great work of art. And watching it again and reading something like a research paper that Anna Maria Grajbowska wrote called Invisible Cuts, where she basically says that this film makes a spectacle out of a woman's psychological degradation and is really critical of Carruth as a storyteller. And I struggled with watching Jeff, like you mentioned, Mike, too. He is kind of a jerk. And I think part of me is, of course, projecting, well, that's Shane Carruth. And what do I know about Shane Carruth? He was an abusive asshole. So when he was on screen, that's probably when I struggled the most. I love everything about this movie. I mean, the thief himself is responsible for stripping away someone's agency and autonomy. And even the way Jeff interacts with Chris at times, it does feel like, oh yeah, he's kind of psychologically dominating her, or at the very least, especially when they're first having conversations, he does come across as very cold and calculated. Like when she's trying to be open with him at the coffee shop by like showing, these are the medications I'm taking, he outright like blocks that out with a menu or something. And he just comes across as lacking kindness towards her. So that made me go, how do they develop a romantic connection here outside of they have an attraction based on the fact that probably they're connected without knowing why? They both experience the same trauma. But
how much is that them falling in love versus their pigs falling in love?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We dove immediately into Carruth, and I want to talk a little bit more as far as just the way, again, talking a little bit as far as the way the film is put together. The traumatic incident that happens with Chris happens very early in the film, which I forgot about the first time. And when I went back to watch it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this happens really early on. And that thing where she's abducted, she drives the thief to her house, and he systematically, like you said, strips her of everything, breaks her down completely. He doesn't let her sleep. He doesn't let her eat. He just has her drink water. He has her write out pages from Walden and make chains with them, paper chains. And I love the idea of the paper chains, especially because this whole thing is about these chains that are being formed. The whole cycle of the flower to the worm to all this. I'll talk more a little bit about eggs later on, but this whole idea of like her being broken down so much this movie is a horror movie for a good 15 minutes. I call it a science fiction movie, and I think the science fiction, and some people actually chafe about that because it's like, oh, there's no robots or ray guns or anything. I'm like, no, anything that is unexplainable. It's that old, whose line was it as far as like, if it's not explainable, it could be magic or science for me. And like the science of this movie, it's like, sure, there's probably a toad that you lick or a bug that you ingest or something that makes you so susceptible. I mean, it's the old stories of voodoo in the old days where it was like, no, voodoo wasn't bringing people back from the dead. It was making people mindless slaves. It's the same stuff that Jeffrey Dahmer was looking to try to do. He wanted to turn people into mindless slaves. The thief can do it. He's found that way. He can have fun with the neighborhood boys in a very, very groomy scene to me. I mean, those neighborhood boys, feels like he's got more going on with them, especially if he can control their minds the way that he does. And I don't know if he literally has sex with Chris, if he rapes Chris, but all of the stuff that happens with Chris is a rape. It is a long, prolonged rape of taking everything from her, every single thing, and especially the money. And I mean, 2013 was a rough time. 2025, you don't have that money in the bank, man, you are just about to be absolutely homeless. You miss one card payment comes in extra, you're ruined for your entire life. I can't imagine what she's going through, the ruination of her whole thing. I read the script of this and I found it to be interesting, some of the differences between the script and the movie, because I believe her sister is a character in the script and is completely blown away by Chris selling the coin collection, getting all the money out of her account, putting in that home equity loan, all that stuff. And of course, she blames Chris. She is just tries to guilt her. I can't believe that you did this. Everybody's going to be so disappointed. And then also that the thief uses her family against her. Like, that's the way that he gets the money, is saying, your mother's been kidnapped. They're going to brutalize her. And what can she do? And just immediately starts thinking of ways that she can get money to these kidnappers. I mean, this whole sequence of her in this house, forget the worms, forget any of that stuff. That is a horror movie for me for a good, solid chunk of it.
Yeah, and it opens with that amazing crash thunder as he opens. You're in a scene where she's in a cafe or a restaurant and there's a nice burbling murmur of social sounds, and then just suddenly like crash of thunder, it cuts to the door open, being dragged out like she's already dead with the rain and everything. Like, when I was listening to that without looking at the visuals, it did make me jump a little bit. It is just immediately shifts modes. And that whole sequence, it can be interpreted in so many ways. That's kind of the part that I came back to the most for like digging into ways of thinking about it. What he has her doing reminds me a lot of how cult leaders will have people doing menial, mindless tasks and singing songs and doing all these kind of things so that they absorb all of their free energy and free thinking time and just drain them so that they can't think for themselves or do anything other than what the cult demands.
Starting now, you're not to blink. If you blink, we go back to the start. Infringement. You blinked. Starting now, you're not to blink. If you blink, we go back to the start. Do you often think about how inconsequential you are?
No.
Do you believe that God will save you from your own ridiculousness?
No.
Have you ever had intercourse with someone inside your family?
Yes.
Have you ever had intercourse with someone inside your family?
Yes.
Who?
My auntie.
Have you killed anyone?
No.
Maybe.
Not me.
Have you killed anyone?
No.
How many times did you have intercourse with your aunt?
3 times.
Where's your aunt now?
I don't know.
Would you like to have intercourse with her again?
No.
Do you regret this?
No.
But it also like reflects on on a grander scale how we are indoctrinated by systems of control and power in schools, in parents, in peer groups to be specific ways, and how the idea that maybe you don't ever actually choose your life, that you get slotted into these paths, and then, you wake up 20 years later and you've in a horrible marriage and a terrible job and you don't feel like you've lived a life, and how in a way then having Thoreau's Walden is entirely about that, about how do you know that you're living your best true life to yourself if you're just slotting into the system of, Emerson's imitation is suicide. That had me thinking that, like, does the thief feel like this is an exchange? That he isn't just stealing from them, that he is giving them something Tyler Durden.
I was just going to say that. That definitely came to mind of like that whole idea of, reconstructing your narrative, but taking away your identity so you can rebuild it. And, I think that's initially what Carruth kind of set out to tell with this story, but it became so much more. Like, even on the surface level, you can look at it as like, well, this is what identity thieves do. In fact, that scam that he pulls with the mother is similar to what identity thieves do to the elderly. It was actually in a movie fairly recently called Thelma with June Squibb, where somebody calls her and says, hey, guess what? Your son's in prison, or, he's been kidnapped or something along those lines. And if you send $10,000, then he'll be released and he'll be okay. And she falls for that. But here it's just a whole other level with like psychological rape, basically.
Yeah. And just as you were saying, Mike, like the thing about any kind of altruistic, positive outcome that the thief may think that he is performing in doing this to her is completely undermined by the economic realities of the world. That it's like, you're absolutely screwed if you don't have these things. That is interesting also in the way of how we live in an ideological system that blames the individual, that it's not about the system. It's not about the environment that they're in, the community they're in, the world they're in. It's all their fault if they become this or if that happens to them, which is also what happens to them. I really like how Jeff talks about what happened to him, because at first, if you're still like, when you're first time watching this, you're like, or if you haven't seen it in 10, 12 years and you're like still putting it all together in your head, when he talks about robbing the company, like you think of him as a thief. But it's like, oh no, of course, he's the incident. That's the thing that happened to him where he was controlled and he robbed the company on behalf of the actual thief. And it's just like, it forces you to readjust how you think about that person's behavior and the morality of it. It's doing so much in this very small period of time.
That's the insidious thing about this, is when Jeff wakes up, when Chris wakes up, when any of these victims wake up from this drug-induced stupor. And I love that at one point you think that they are awake after the thief leaves. There's that long sequence of Chris, and I was talking about the shallow depth of field, and you kind of fragment her body. We see the fingers and the feet and the legs and that. And for me, I'm like, okay, well, this ordeal is over. But then the worms come, and the worms happen, and she gets hypnotized by the music, and just the same kind of music that's bringing up the worms from the ground, like earthworms rather than these drug-induced worms. The same kind of thing that's doing that is the same thing that's drawing her to the farm. And it took me a while to remember, oh no, she's not done with this drug trip yet. She is still completely zonked with this. It's not until she wakes up on the freeway, and that's when the drug trip is over. And that scene is horrific again to me, that you're waking up, and at first it sounds like it's the wind, talking about the way that he manipulates sound. It's wonderful. You think that it's wind, and then you're like, no, that's the sound of roaring traffic. And she wakes up and she's like in the median of a fucking freeway. And you're like, how did she get here? She has no idea. We have no idea. That ride must have been really scary for her, and especially when she stopped. We don't know what that was like. Then she has to put the pieces back together. And this whole thing of, like you're saying, blaming the victim, they're blaming themselves. Like, what did I do? Did I have some sort of drug trip? Did I go crazy? Because he says later on, like, oh, I must have been high on cocaine. Like, he thinks that he had a drug problem. Jeff had a drug problem. It's like, you probably didn't have a drug problem. Maybe he did, but I don't think so. I think he is filling in these gaps, trying to make up excuses for why the hell did I do this? She's probably doing the exact same thing. And that, again, to me, is just one of the most horrific things, that you are giving people such trauma that, and this is so true to life, when you undergo really bad trauma, you try to fill in those gaps. You try to make up stories to comfort yourself. If you have gaps in your memories, you try to make up things to fill those gaps. And they are filling them with the most self-indicting things, making them feel even worse about themselves for something that they had absolutely no control over.
Yeah, and I think of that in the context of mental health, too, because people fall into those fugue states, or when they experience mania, they don't always have like an awareness of what they're doing, to where, it creates a lot of unfortunate tension with other people because they don't know how to perceive your state of mind. And at the same time, you're doing things that you think are the right things when they're actually the wrong things. So it's a really layered film to discuss and think about. But like, yeah, the first time I saw it, I could not make heads or tails of why necessarily the sampler was able to, what his role in everything was, especially in the beginning when they first met. Like, how did he find her? I know that he was using those speakers as almost like in a Dune-like sense to conjure up the worms by thumping. When I first saw that, I was like, what's this guy's deal? And that sequence early on, again, talk about body horror, just like having to extract that worm in that capacity and transfer it over to the pig is pretty harrowing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the other thing. When she wakes up, she also sees how her body has been mutilated. She doesn't know that she's the one that mutilated it. She has no idea. She could be the victim of whatever. And that then also plays into the whole thing of her when she thinks she's pregnant, and they go, "Oh, no, you're not pregnant. You have nothing going on in your body that would say that you are pregnant." They put her through a whole battery of tests and find out that she had cancer. Stage 3, they say, but now it's removed. And also she basically will never have children, or if she can conceive, she'll never carry it to term. That scene contains to me like the line of the movie where it's the nurse off screen, just as a voiceover, say,
"How are you supposed to help someone like that?
How are you supposed to help someone like that?" Total victim blaming here, thinking that Chris is just being difficult, that she is pretending, that she doesn't know that she's had stage 3 cancer and had this thing removed. No idea. And then I'm questioning, was that the sampler? Did he take that out? How did that happen? Or was that the thief's baby? Like what, what is this? Like, is that the gift of the worm? Like, so she has been violated even more than this already violation, this violation that the thief does to her, and that then she also does to her own body. I mean, when she goes back to her house after she wakes up on that freeway and sees all those cuts all over her body, it looks like a fucking crime scene. Just the blood everywhere. The fridge is completely torn apart. I mean, everything is a complete mess. It looks like someone went through and just destroyed everything, not knowing that it was herself.
I'm just thinking that, in a way, this film is a blessed film. Blessed and cursed. There's so many things in it that are both blessed and cursed, and that's one of them. That, like, okay, so she doesn't have stage 3 cancer anymore, but she's not going to be able to have kids. It's blessed and cursed at the same time. Again, those sort of dualities that are also singularities. There's so much that's inexplicable in here, and you can like spend forever trying to figure it out, but it just isn't. And that is a big part of the sci-fi aspect of how it extrapolates and builds on sort of knowns and then into unknowns. And the thing the Upstream Color does is it doesn't necessarily, it kind of skips over the unknown and goes into what some other known, but you don't get that continuity, which is also the experience that Chris has, that she loses continuity. Their narrative has a fracture, a missing piece, and how much that destabilizes her. I wonder how much like viewers who aren't comfortable living in that sort of state, that can't deal with that, are the ones who get thrown out of this film and who react so intensely negatively to it because they have to have an absolute continuity of meaning and understanding. And it just like presses buttons. Because this film definitely presses a variety of buttons. I can see it definitely being a film that would, there's certainly parts that are traumatic and could definitely induce some sort of PTSD episodes for people who have gone through various experiences. And a big part of that is that it is just sitting so close to a lot of very difficult and complicated emotions. That's the primary continuity, is emotional experience.
When I was looking up, because I will do this these days just because there's a lot of movies that I talk about where there's not a lot of extras, or even, there are, I think I found a couple 100 pages worth of articles about this. So I was able to do that. But yesterday when I was at work, I was like, I want to watch some video essays about Upstream Color and just hear what people have to say about it. And when I did just a simple search on YouTube, I would say probably 6 out of 8 videos that I watched were all narrated by people that identify as women. And I found that fascinating because I was like, normally, film criticism, here we are, 3 dudes, but it's the realm of dudes. And I was so glad that I could hear these female voices talking about this film, especially because with Chris being our main character and the idea of this trauma behind it, I was like, okay, yeah, I want to hear what women have to say about this. And I just found that to be wonderful that there were so many women that were talking about this movie, and it wasn't just a bunch of guys being like, oh yeah, like what would I do with that mind control drug, dude, or any of that kind of stuff. Not that there were any like assholes like that I found out there. Everybody was giving some really good insights on this. I did really like the video essay talking about Walden and just how that connects to this. I would almost like to go a little bit further and talk about Emerson as well, with this whole credo of I am a transparent eyeball, because I find that really fits with this film too, much more on the tail end when it comes to the way that the sampler can enter into people's lives and just be completely transparent but observing. And there's that moment of power that happens towards the end of the film where Chris can look back, and that disconcerts him, and I love that. That is like the moment where she finally gets that power back, but that's so far into this movie because you have to deal with this trauma. She wakes up about 25 minutes into this movie, and the rest of this film is basically her trying to deal with what the fuck happened to her. And I love that this movie takes that long, because it's about an hour and a half, a little bit over. It takes more than an hour for her to process this stuff. She's never going to be fully the same way that she was. She has to literally live a new life by the end of this film. But just the idea of how long it takes to process, and these hundreds of hours of therapy and all that, like if you're lucky kind of thing. There are so many people that don't know that they've been traumatized. She definitely knows something happened, but it takes her even then a while to figure that out. It's not until she starts to put these clues together. It's almost like she and Jeff start to investigate themselves. And I like them as a couple once they finally do get together. But yeah, it takes a while for Jeff. He never really warms up to me. I think he's a dickhead all the way through this whole film. And he gets so upset. He starts to, and I don't know if he's doing this on purpose, and I don't know if she's telling the truth, the whole idea of him stealing her memories, I found that to be fascinating as well, the way that they're mixed up together when she's telling that story about almost drowning, and he takes it as his own. And I'm like, okay, who really did have that happen? And is it one of those things where you hear somebody tell a story so many times, or you hear someone tell a story that is very meaningful to them, and you start to feel so close to them that you start to picture, what if I was there as well?
Yeah, where does one person end and the other begin? Like, especially when you're so fully invested in a relationship with another person. It's like, even with my partner, it's kind of funny how sometimes we pick up on, oh, you're starting to do that little habit that I do, and just because we're living together, or we, share so much that it is kind of funny when those like correlations happen and you don't even realize it. But I do think about, just the sampler as a character too, because it's interesting. I really do love, the fact that this almost becomes a silent film for maybe the last 20 minutes or so, but that warehouse moment where they're sort of just looking at each other and those the facial expressions and body language say so much in those moments. But at the same time, I'm still not entirely clear why she chooses to kill him, because technically the thief is the person that screwed her over. I mean, my feelings were the sampler had like helped her regain her life in a way by getting the worm out. You know, I never saw him as the quote unquote bad guy, but you know, we have talked a lot about nobody is good or bad necessarily. I just thought it's not the moment that like I feel like is completely out of place, but it's just the lingering question I had was, what does she gain by killing him? And is it necessary to the story too?
I was thinking about this as well, because it was that, as I said earlier, that he starts off and you think that he is a positive character, but by the end of it, he seemingly is not. For myself, as someone who spends a lot of time over my life with animals, and I've been fostering some feral cats recently, and one of them, I'm pretty sure she had been dumped because the only thing she was afraid of was plastic bags, which tells me that she was probably stuck in a plastic bag and jumped out of a car. So the scene with the piglets where he puts them in the Hessian bag and just drops them in the creek to drown is like, oh, even just thinking about it now is like, it's really just fucking horrible. It's so absolutely unforgivable to me. Like, there's just no excuse, no reason. It's like, because you have that scene just before where the guy wants to sell the pigs and you're kind of like, oh, no, don't sell the pigs. You can't split them up. He's like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. And you're like, oh, good. And then he does something worse. That really complicates it. I don't exactly want to pull this idea in because I don't think it quite fits, but I couldn't escape it on multiple viewings he kind of looks a bit like and feels like a Zuckerberg type. Like someone who's hovering there at people's connections and parasitic, like getting some kind of energy off of that. He's tapping into other people's connections and networks and being present in their lives without them knowing or necessarily inviting him, but without knowing that they've agreed to that by going to him or they're still under the spell. And so it's like, oh yeah, social media is a positive thing, except that it has not become a positive thing. There's something in there that is an echo of that from me, that is like, oh yeah, there is a positive aspect to what the sampler does, but it's not actually positive. It's not turned to entirely good outcomes, or it's not made into something better. Like, he's still keeping these people separated and disconnected, even though he has all these files of them and he has these connections to them. And that's what the actual act of the freeing moment when they break loose is not when they kill him, but when they reconnect these people by giving them their information back. It's like, actually, instead of just being like, oh, I'm overseeing all of this status quo, I'm actually like breaking apart the status quo. There's no part of the film which gives him an opportunity to speak for himself and to give his justification, which I actually respect, because it's just like, yeah, nah, you had plenty of time sitting there ruminating, doing your thing, and you were still just farting about making music and sticking your nose in other people's stuff and keeping these walls up. Yeah, no, it's not, he's not worth the time. There's other ways and people who can do those same things and maybe not keep the walls up, and they deserve the oxygen more. So I also wonder, that was one part I went back and rewatched a couple of times of, they see him, they look him in the eye and he is seen, and it is in an empty office space area. And then he gets up and moves away and kind of collapses against the wall. And then they're in the pig yard but he's started clutching his heart, and then she shoots him. And I do actually wonder about what happens there and how much of it is literal and how much is symbolic. And it reminds me of the Samuel Beckett's only film in which Buster Keaton is attempting to flee from being observed, and how like he's there's no escape from this existential dread of being seen. And it's like, it appears that it is actually the act of being observed that kills him. Like his heart begins to give out, and her shooting him is more to do with her and her dominating him, and in that process separating from him and obliterating him. But I think there's the series there is complicated.
Yeah, I struggle with that too. And if you intentionally drown animals, maybe you should get killed. I don't know.
And symbolically, the animals are her children. They're children.
True. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The rage that she has when she feels those babies taken away, that she mutilates herself again by punching that glass. And that's the interesting part to me, too, as far as the editing goes. I mean, the editing in this film is just terrific. I love when the thief talks about how his head is made out of the same material as the sun, and you get her turning away and the light on the side of her face, and she turns 3 times. It's very John Woo turning, and that sun, that light on the side of her face. But when the sampler steals the babies, I don't know if I'm sure you guys have been around, as I know especially you, Ben, have been around a lot of video equipment. It reminds me of shuttling through a video, going back and forth with the control knob. And it feels like we're going back and forth in time. And this could be completely wrong. I could just be misreading this scene completely, but it feels like we kind of start with her reaction and follow how she reacts to this whole thing. And then we shuttle back and then see how Jeff reacts to this whole thing too. The way that he gets this rage and that he attacks his coworkers and that they fire him and he has that box of his stuff and he throws that down into the atrium of the files flying everywhere. It's very, very beautiful the way that it's shot, but it is just so wild the way that we're going back and just this whole thing of how she calls him and he knows exactly where she's at, in that he recognizes, I don't know how he recognizes, if it's the way that she describes the room that she's in, but he recognizes that she's in his office building and talks her through. Reminded me a little bit of that Tony Scott film Deja Vu with Denzel Washington, where there's like 2 layers of reality on top of each other, but he's like talking her through the office, and his car pulls up just as she's coming out of the back door, and that reunites them. And because there is a lot of struggle, there's a lot of friction between those two, and there's a moment where she like just leaves him, but that reunification happens after the babies have been taken, and now they are a couple and they have to face this thing together. But they are so scared from that, the way that they are in the bathtub. And I love it. It's kind of the iconic image from this movie, them in the bathtub together. But I love how them in the bathtub together becomes the widescreen of the film, that we're showing them sideways from up above, and just that framing of those two together in the bathtub is just wonderful. And that's one of those things where I'm just like, I'm not just watching a film, I'm watching something that is taking me to a whole other place.
Yeah, and it makes me think of what it's like to have a panic attack, because sometimes you don't know why or what's causing it or what's triggering it, and you just know you have to get away. And that's kind of what they do. They sort of hunker down and try to get through whatever they're feeling together, and it's palpable fear, and you feel for them. You know, it's crazy to me. Like, even I feel for a couple in this movie that we don't even really know a whole lot about. It's when the sampler is observing other people's lives in kind of like this onlooker voyeuristic fashion. And there's that couple that's constantly like, when one of them is leaving for work and the wife keeps saying the same thing over and over again. And I'm like, I find that so moving, even though I had no context for who these people are. It's just, it works in of itself, all by itself. Yeah.
Really taps into such a wealth of human experiences and emotions, and it isn't bogged down by having to set it up or explain it or context it, which really works in its favor. And it's funny because having rewatched Primer, I have a theory that I think that Primer actually had a lot more in the back end, and Carruth maybe realized it was better to have nothing and leave people with a mystery than to like sap all the energy out of the film by having more. And it kind of, I both respect that, and also it feels a bit like a grift where you've got to like cheated that you're like, oh no, it's an amazing deep film. It's like, no, you just cut out a chunk. And I think that works better here in Upstream Color. It doesn't feel so much like it's a cheat. It feels genuinely like, oh, you've just managed to capture the bit that connects us to it. And it becomes that reflecting pool. And that's why I think, you see a lot of people who do connect with this film, like it really stirs something up in them and generates a lot of feelings and thoughts. And I think that's a big part of that is the aspect of bonding over trauma, and how that can generally be not a great thing, but it can be important sometimes to have somebody that you connect with like that, even if it's just to get through some stage of your life to progress to the next part. And I think that the film does that well, and that is where it's like that thing of that it's not necessarily positive, that relationship isn't necessarily good or healthy, and that they do bounce off each other in quite difficult and chaotic ways. And it feels best when they're both on a path moving forwards, like it's a mystery that they're solving, but that isn't necessarily a good relationship thing. It's very like complex and difficult. I keep saying, how many times am I going to say the word complex and difficult?
As many times as I say hypnotic.
It's aging really well, this film. It's funny because it has aged really badly because of Carruth himself. I watched it with my coworker here, and he's in his early 20s and had never seen any Carruth films, and he knew all about Carruth before he saw the film, and he had a real difficult time with it because he just couldn't see any other aspect of it, which was interesting to see, and I don't disagree with that viewing experience. But there's other ways, like the social media stuff, which social media hadn't really become a thing at the time it was made, the connectivity of that and the networks. But there's also the ecological, environmental collapse aspect, which the experience that a lot of people are having of like extreme depression and fear and panic over the horrific things that are happening in the world, to the environment, to ecologies, to animals, extinctions and things, and how that's something seemingly so disconnected from us, but is absolutely connected to us, and being struck by these intense emotional feelings from things happening so far away. It really is. It's just another layer that feels, this is exactly why it's a science fiction film, because the things that maybe seemed more abstract and fantastical have now just become normal.
Yeah, prescient for sure.
It's interesting how much of the script didn't get shot, or if it did, that they left it out. I mean, there's so much dialogue that is in the script that just didn't happen. There's a thing that they do around trying to locate. It's like that, I think of it like Odd Thomas, like how he'll just kind of wander around and then be able to find things. They're trying to find things. They're searching for things. They're trying to really connect with that missing time, with that trauma that they had, so they can start to understand it. They will do this thing where they will go out driving, and they show it in the film a little bit as far as like, well, is it two lefts and a right or this kind of stuff. They end up coming up with this whole thing of like index cards, so they're not showing each other their answer. Well, they'll have a card in their hand that says left or right, and then they have to show it at the same time, and then they go from that. And later on in the film, they really cut this whole part out, which I was glad for, actually, which was when all of the trauma victims are coming together and going to the farm, they're doing the same thing. And they're all in a van, and they're all like saying left or right. And they find that there are two people that don't belong there, that they didn't undergo this trauma, that they're just there for somebody that they know. And they're screwing up the whole left or right game that they're playing. It's not a game, but the whole left or right thing. And we kind of get that, too, when it comes to some of the shots of the birds and the way that the birds are all moving together like a flock. It's like these people have become a flock of people. They've become, what's a group of pigs called?
A group of pigs is called a drift or drove. A group of young pigs is called a litter. A group of hogs is called a passil or team. A group of swine is called a sounder. A group of boars is called a singular.
But they become a group of pigs all kind of going around like these birds flying, like which way do we need to go? Okay, we are like locating where we all belong because we're connected to these pigs. We're connected to what the sampler is doing. And I just really quick wanted to talk a little bit about one of the most obvious metaphors of the whole movie is the chain, having the paper chains that she's making. Starting the whole movie off with the paper chain and showing the thief throw away a bag full of paper chains. This is a link in a chain as far as these event goes. And I always talk about these cycles that are happening. And I really appreciate it's a pretty simple metaphor, but it's really a nice metaphor. It also really talks to the whole cycle of abuse and everything, because one thing that gets cut out of the film that's also in the script are the two people that are finding these flowers and find the blue flowers. And the blue flowers have, I think they're orchids, maybe they're orchid thieves. I don't know. The blue flowers have the worms, and that's what the thief is looking for, are these blue flowers. The blue dust that they have tells him that there are worms in there. And these two people that find these flowers are a granddaughter and grandmother. And in the script, there's this whole thing of like how they find these flowers and they get to name the flowers. And the young girl is like, oh, we get to name these flowers because they're, we found them. And she says that she wants to name the flower after the granddad Walter. The grandmother is like, no, we should name these flowers after him. Never says why, but I'm just like, did he do something bad? Is that like this cycle of abuse? Like the grandfather did this and did something bad, and like it's passing through these people. It's very much like that whole idea of like, if the father's an abuser, the son's going to be the abuser. His son's going to be the abuser. Because what's the most beautiful part of this whole movie for me is when she shoots the sampler, the cycle's over. We are done now with this whole thing. We are not going to drown any more pig babies ever again.
Yeah, and the thief can't continue to do what he's been doing, right?
And you see him sadly going through those plants. Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable, too, to like begin on that image. And yet, I think somebody watching it for the first time may not necessarily pick up on, though these are chain links and this has been a scam that the thief has been doing over and over again. We don't even know how many times he's done it, but it's clear that he has. And I wonder about that in terms of you're saying that the original script had a lot of dialogue, because this is kind of the anti-primer. Primer has so much exposition and dialogue and people trying to, explain their way out of what's happening, or at least figure out or together like collaborate on what's going on. And here it's kind of, like the antithesis of that, where it's basically characters figuring things out without explaining it outright. And that allows the audience to sort of project themselves into this experience more. My takeaway has always been, well, this is about reconstructing your narrative, losing your identity, and processing trauma, and how all those things sort of interplay with you throughout your life, and how do you come to terms with that and find your sense of community in the end. I get the sense of interconnectivity with everything going on. Like, yes, we've all experienced horrific things in life, and yet we've all experienced wonderful things in life too. So there is that kind of duality and maybe ultimate balance that we get to by the end of the film that sort of leaves me more on a hopeful note than anything else. The visual storytelling here is just impeccable because every shot means something. You just don't know what it is entirely, especially on a first viewing.
This means something.
Well, think of the shot of the pig pens at night and the doors are opening, and then cut to the subway or the train car and the doors are opening there. And I'm just like, this is amazing. And it's what, 2-3 seconds at most? I mean, the pace of the editing of this movie is wonderful. It's also very disorienting, which I think is perfect for this, that we are cutting to things that we don't necessarily know. I mean, there's a whole idea of we can talk about editing styles. We can talk about Hollywood editing and all this kind of stuff. And I just think that this editing style, it's been, and we can talk about influence, but it's been picked up by a lot of other people. And I don't necessarily think that they do it as well as this. And even this probably isn't the origin of this style of editing. but the way that he disorients us every time he cuts, and it takes us it might be a fraction of a second, but it takes us a little bit of time to get ourselves situated again. And that constant reevaluation of where am I, what's happening, I'm sure feels very much like what Chris and Jeff go through every second of the day. Just they still feel completely out of sorts with us.
In the audio commentary that's on the Umbrella Blu-ray, the commentator mentions Maya Deren.
Oh,
wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Editing connection. And it's been a while since I've dug into her work, so I couldn't really add to that, but I thought it was worth bringing up as a connection because thinking back to what I remember, very strikingly similar. But also another film, The Shout, Skolimowski's The Shout, feels like it was a big influence on this in both the sound being about a musician sound sampler kind of guy, and also the fact that it's someone invading their life and taking over it and controlling and splintering it. That it feels like that is, I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere, but it was just like, The Shout is so all through Upstream Color.
Well, and then John Hurt is a composer in that as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, good point. But I'm glad that those two influences came up because I think like just relying so heavily on like, it's very much like Terrence Malick kind of got old. I could see it, obviously, but there's more to it than just like, that's poetic, it's elliptical, and, the editing style, it's like, let's, lots of shots of nature. Yeah, it's kind of surface level stuff to me.
It's also, it feels like Jeff Nichols' Take Shelter, and Jeff Nichols' work in general was a big influence on him, I reckon. Take Shelter, especially given it has the ecological aspects, sort of dealing with trauma and community and isolation and such.
I'm going to go way out there when it comes to a potential influence on this as well. All throughout the entire script, there's a location which is called the Cerulean Plaza Hotel. And that location keeps coming up. And I don't think you even see it in the movie at all. And that's where the flower show is. There's, because there's a flower show when they find these things, they get awarded for having the blue orchids or blue flowers. And the cerulean goes through this whole thing, and as soon as I see the word cerulean, I start thinking about one of my favorite episodes of The X-Files, which was called The Pusher from season 3, episode 17. And that was a guy who has a brain tumor. It's a little man who suddenly gets power and he wants to become a big man, and he can control people. He can push them, thus the name of the episode. And there's a wonderful moment in the first part of the episode that I just love so much, where the pusher has been arrested and he's in the back of a police car, and he starts to talk to one of the officers, and he just says, "That's a really lovely shade of blue."
Deputy, I just gotta say that your uniform is really the most soothing shade of blue. I'm not kidding you, I noticed those things. It's a sky blue. Very calming, very tranquil. I think the word for that particular shade is cerulean, actually. Cerulean blue.
Okay, we get it. It's a nice shade of blue.
Cerulean blue. Cerulean makes me think of a breeze. A gentle breeze.
Hey, Mr. Blackwell, put a sock in it.
Cerulean is a gentle breeze. Cerulean.
Basically hypnotizes this police officer to drive in front of a truck which has Cerulean Shipping Company on it. So as soon as I see Cerulean and there's mind control, I'm like, he must have been a fan of the X-Files.
Definitely.
I definitely remember that episode now that you mention it, because I think it even ends with like Skinner and Russian roulette, right?
No, it's Mulder with that, yeah.
Okay.
And Mulder points the gun at Scully, and there's a one bullet in there somewhere. She pulls a fire alarm, disrupts the whole thing, and then he shoots the pusher right in the head, and it would have been the bullet that he had shot Scully with. Shoots him in the chest. Shoots him in the chest, just like how the sampler gets shot in the chest.
I don't want to give you more podcast projects, Mike, but I want to hear you talk X-Files episodes.
There have been so many better X-Files podcasts than what I could ever do.
As I was reading some of these materials this morning, I was like, I bet somebody has written something somewhere about Annihilation and Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy in relation to Upstream Color.
Oh, I can see that. Yeah.
So, I went to Google, I typed it in, bam, right there.
That's a really good comparison, yeah.
That was published in 2014. And there's so much there because, like, that's where I learned about the concept of terroir. I'm bad at my French. Terroir, which is the French winemaking term that relates to how all the factors that influence the creation of grapes in the soil, how it can differ even, 100 meters apart. And it relates to that all the things that have happened over time in that spot. So, like, for instance, a great battle happened there 500 years ago on one side of the hill and not the other, and all the blood soaked into the soil and changed the composition. And obviously, that's the same kind of idea of the upstream color of, like, what trickles down and alters and changes, and how you can never know how far back those linkages of chains go. Here's all the chains and linkages that I'm stumbling across. So the article I found was by Joshua Rothman on Jeff Vandermeer, and it was called The Weird Thoreau. But he talks about Timothy Morton's 2013 book called Hyper Objects, published the same year that Upstream Color comes out. Have you heard of hyper objects? I'll give you this the definition from David Tompkins writing another article in LA Review of Books. He said that Morton's hyperobjects are events or systems or processes that are too complex, too massively distributed across space and time for humans to get a grip on. Black holes are hyperobjects. Nuclear materials such as uranium and plutonium with their deep time half-lives are hyperobjects. Global warming and mass species extinction are hyperobjects. We know we live with the local effects of these phenomena, but mostly they are quite literally beyond our ken. In one sense, they are abstractions. In another, they are ferociously, catastrophically real because they are so massively distributed in terms of causality and consequence. They refute or distort our homely notions of time and space. Is that a description of Upstream Color or what?
Yeah, and speaking of that, of the Umbrella Blu-ray, there's something interesting written on the back, and I don't know the source of who wrote this, but it really dives into the idea of being in an altered state, particularly when it mentions how correlations have been found between the parasite as well as OCD, as well as suicide among people with mood disorders, including bipolar disorder. Although there is a correlation between the parasite and many psychological disorders, the underlying mechanism is unclear. When it talks about this, it made me think of toxoplasmosis, which is this crazy parasite that creates this enzyme that does kind of alter your behavior and like rewiring the production of dopamine in the brain to where it actually can cause schizophrenia in people. And oddly enough, it is often found in cat poop and infects pregnant women. It's not an alarming thing that actually happens on a regular basis. Like, don't worry if you own a cat and you're pregnant, don't think you're in trouble or in danger or anything, but it's just this.
If you're pregnant and you have a cat, hopefully your partner is the one that's changing the litter. There you go.
You're not going to go down like Tommy in Train Spotting. It's okay.
Or like Adrian in Rocky. She was lifting up that big bucket of dog food when she had her near miscarriage. So thank goodness that didn't happen. I wanted to really highlight the scene of when the sampler is making the music. And I love that it becomes a symphony, not just with him creating the music, but then it's Chris and Jeff are adding to the music. The sound of Chris's printer as it's going across and printing up blue flowers, which I found to be fantastic. Also, the sound of the water that Jeff is running becomes part of that music as well. And I just love that we're cross-cutting between again, the editing, fucking brilliant for this, and just cross-cutting between these things and doing all of this and creating this song throughout the movie. And then that the sampler doesn't like it, and what's he do? He doesn't just tear up the music. he literally just takes it and throws it into the river, presaging the whole thing that happens to these poor piglets. And the whole idea of like the music, because the music is really what draws them to him. There's something that you can't really see very easily, but when he goes right before this whole sequence starts with this music that he's creating, he stops at his mailbox, the sampler, and on the mailbox it says Quinoa Records, or Quinoa label, I think it is. And eventually Jeff finds that label. He finds all these CDs with that. And the whole idea of reliving trauma through music. I mean, sometimes a song it's as powerful as a smell. It can take you back to a particular time so easily, and you just start to feel those same feelings. And using music as this way to connect to the sampler and to connect to this trauma, I just think that that's absolutely brilliant. And the script, again, sorry to keep harping on this, but they actually go to a concert. Like all of these people, they kind of all merge into this concert hall, all of the people that have their pigs on the sampler's farm. And the sampler, after working on all of his compositions through the rest of the film, gives a concert at one point, and that's before they eventually find the farm.
Wow. I would have loved to have seen that scene. No, that's powerful.
I was sort of having a thought earlier, and that's kind of brought me back around to it, of how I'm currently in the middle of working on a project where I'm watching dailies every day. You're seeing all the bits from like episode 1, and then they're shooting 5 minutes later, bits from episode 6, and how the act of editing brings parts that you shot 90 days ago together with stuff that you shot now. And so you end up with these 2 times, 2 places connected as a whole of one person who has gone through so much and is a different person to who they were 90 days ago. It's holding that together as a single character, and how music, what you said there, and how music can transport you. It can transport you back time and place, like decades before. And also how we're like listening to something that was made so long ago. But it's also a transformation. It's definitely how music is presented in the film is transformative, in that he is taking an object and transforming the sound of the object to create music. And we are seeing a visualization of music in him doing that. So you've got this real zigzagging backwards and forwards between different states and ways of being and processes all kind of happening simultaneously. It is kind of magical, that literalization, but also, deliteralization.
Commodification as well, that he's taking something natural, making it digital, putting it out as a CD, and then somebody buys that, and that becomes the cycle. He gets more money, he can buy better equipment, he can make more music, etc., etc. Like, that's a cycle as well, which is fascinating. I'm talking all about editing, but I have to say one of my favorite shots in the movie doesn't even have an edit in it. It's when he's going through all of these people's lives and touching the pigs, and then suddenly going to their lives. One thing that's horrific is how many people has the thief done this to? Because it feels like a never-ending cavalcade of all of these people. There's only so many pigs on this farm, but you're just like, oh my God, so many people have had their lives ruined by the thief. And at one point, there's a guy that comes in, he puts a quarter in a meter or something, and he moves out of the way, and there's a sampler right behind him. That reveal always kind of takes my breath away, because we keep seeing these ways of like using editing to bring him to a place. He'll be, there's a woman who's eating, and then somebody passes by, and then he's sitting there. There's a guy in a car, and then we pan over and he's sitting there. That's not a cut, obviously, but there's, that pan over, and it's just like, okay, this is fascinating, the way that they're bringing us in, and that he's already there. It feels like when the guy puts that quarter in the meter, it's just, in that whole sequence, and I think, Jim, you mentioned this before with the woman who keeps saying I love you to her husband, and that the husband, is it his mother that is in the ambulance? Like, I don't know exactly where we come in, because again, that feels like we're going back and forth in time. Maybe that's his wife in the ambulance, And I think that's what's happening. I think the wife is in the ambulance and we're with the guy as he is starting to remember. So the sampler not only is visiting this guy, but the sampler isn't shown in the guy's memories, but he's seeing the guy's memories and he is experiencing the guy's memories. And because we see him when it's more present, when it's the ambulance, when it's the hospital bed, and then it feels like we're seeing then the memories that this guy is having as he's sitting there by his wife in the hospital. And I think that whole sequence, again, two characters that we don't know. We've never experienced these two before. But then when you realize this guy's gone through all that shit, and here's his wife trying to reach out to him, and she can't make that connection. She just keeps saying, I love you. And he's like, those words don't mean anything anymore. It just breaks your freaking heart, man.
Yeah, I really do wonder how many victims there were. Like, it's also interesting that a really haunting shot is when Chris first comes home after being on the freeway and she arrives home for the first time. There's like these silhouettes of people that are just there as she's walking through.
I thought that too, and I skipped back, and you're wrong. It's before she awakens on the highway. It's actually, when you were saying before you think that she's come out of it, there's actually a second time when you think that she's come out of it. It's that where she's in her house and she closes an external door and starts to move through it. And there's all these people standing in the house looking outwards from the house. And she doesn't make I look at them or acknowledge them or anything. She moves through and she goes and runs the water in the bathroom sink and then kind of like starts to sort of go, huh? And as she moves out and then she wakes up and she's in the car. So it's, same. I thought the same thing. I thought, and it's like, no, it's actually, that editing is like, it tricks you so beautifully in a couple of places. There are a lot of people in that house. It certainly was a lot of people that have been affected by this.
I mean, when they make love the first time and they're in the pig pen, in the sty, and waking up in the sty, and just that image of those beautiful, clean white sheets amongst the mud. And you're like, okay, they are the pigs right then. They are the ones that are having the sex and conceiving the babies. And just that tie between the pigs and the people just becomes this really beautiful thing, especially towards the end when you see her with that piglet, and it's like she finally has her baby, and it's not hers. You know, it's got to be one of the other pigs because she can't conceive. But it's her pig's baby, and that becomes her baby, which I think that's wonderful and just such a nice way of giving her some closure to this, because otherwise there's nothing. I mean, just kind of going back to the whole psychology angle of it again, those rituals that they do, that they don't even know that they're doing. And it takes a while for them to kind of awake to them. And it feels very much like therapy, like where you're just talking about this bad behavior, things that are going on in your life. And it takes another person to kind of push you into that and say like, hey, listen, there's a pattern going on here. Like you picking out all the blue M&Ms out of your cup, you with this huge thing of straws and making chains out of the paper. Her even knitting stuff, just like, well, she knitted for the thief, and now here she is knitting on the train. But this whole thing of her throwing out rocks into the pool and then diving and quoting from Walden, and she's basically rereading Walden to herself as she's doing this. And I love when he starts to recognize, he's almost the therapist in that scene where he starts to recognize what she's doing. And then starts to read along with her, and he's reading, and she'll pop up and finish the line kind of thing. And for the longest time, I'm just like, is she aware of this? Is she aware of him, that he's even standing there? Is he just witnessing her reliving this trauma with these stones and going down and picking up these stones, putting them onto the side of the pool? Is that what's going on? Or is she aware? And it feels like towards the end, she starts to gain awareness, and that's, again, another strength. And finally, it's like, okay, we're starting to have more of a breakthrough.
I think the significance of this story within the world of the pigs is that these are the first two that have come across each other, that no other victims have encountered their other, and become aware of the other. And I think that partly because of how important the being seen aspect is, that when she's moving through the house and we can see all these people there, but she doesn't see them. And then when she looks at the sampler and he is seen, it changes things. And so I think there is something significant to that in the not experiencing something in isolation, that being seen by a person who has a similar experience or identical experience allows something to shift, that you're not stuck in a kind of loop. And also that's why it does, even after so many horrific things happen in this film, that it ends feeling incredibly positive and optimistic and beautiful, because the ending is a refutation of disconnection. Like, it refuses that we are disconnected. It refuses the systems and everything that pulls us apart and says that, no, it doesn't matter if we destroy the planet or we do this or we do that. It's like, no, at the end of it, it's like, we are connected. I am connected to this animal. I am connected to this earth. And that has meaning. And that is just incredibly powerful. And it does it without saying it, which means it really hits at some low down, like deep psychological level that you actually really feel it. And that's super powerful.
Yeah, for me, it always feels like it ends on a hopeful note, showcasing the possibility of resilience, just sort of realizing, I've gone through all of this trauma and all these horrible things, but there's still a sense of interconnectivity with everyone and everything. I mean, so that final image always brings tears to my eyes, because it does make me think of like the kind of connection I have with my cat. Like, despite war and capitalism and the hordes of selfish people that exist in the world, I can come home and almost like experience something very pure about like the kind of love, not just a cat, any animal can have with their owner. It's just, they look at you and they just know there's love there and there's love for each other. And I mean, I imagine that could happen to me too if I were living on a farm with a lot of little piglets around. Like, I would just feel a little more centered and hopeful and just like grateful that, these animals are not out like to steal my money. No, they're just here to survive and eat and live. I certainly have this awareness all the time that the outside world is falling apart and that human beings are often, selfish and kind of nasty, but there is a sense of unconditional love and a feeling of we're not all alone and that we can get through it together. And that's kind of the note that the movie ends on for me, even though, again, like a lot of people sort of hang on, the fact that like, is this opaque? Is this ambiguous? I feel like it's about, overcoming what you've been through and realizing that you can get through it in the right ways, hopefully with the right people. And that's kind of when all those victims come together. It feels like a sense of community that I think a lot of people want out of life in the end. Find like-minded people who understand where you're coming from.
Well, I like what you had to say, Ben, as far as these two might be the first two who have ever found each other, who have recognized the trauma in each other. And I wonder if I can relate it to music as far as those two together are stronger, because it's like when you play two notes together. It takes three to make a chord, but they're forming something a little bit stronger together. Now, when they do that thing where they're saying, is it a left turn or a right turn to get back out to the farm, they have that togetherness. They have the strength of their decisions being made together rather than just one person trying to feel their way along in the metaphorical dark. And I think that's also when all of those people show up at the farm, now it becomes a symphony. Now we have so many notes. Now we have all of these people who have the same communal, and I think that word is very important when it comes to living on a farm. They have that communal aspect, and now they all come together. They repaint the fences. They, fix up the farm. They all bring this togetherness. Now they all care for these pigs together. Now they all have their other halves that they're reunited with. I like what you're saying too, Jim, as far as that unconditional love. And it just so reminds me of like people being split apart, and you're always, it's that Hedwig song, right? Like we had 2 sets of arms, 2 sets of legs, one giant head with faces on either side. And then we were torn asunder by the gods, and now you're always looking for that other half of yourself. It feels like they are all coming together as a whole, as that one big beast at the end of it.
And I think it's very significant that Chris and Jeff aren't presented ever as a whole, that the other half is the pigs that they find. And at the end, we don't end with Jeff and Chris and their 2 pigs together like a big happy family. We end with Chris and her pig. It's a singular journey to find the whole singular, the other half. That reconnection happens there, and that it isn't shared necessarily, but together, as you said, like that communal experience that each of them together is finding their whole selves, which allows them to then hopefully come together as a larger whole.
Well, I'm grateful that we had this communal experience to share our love of this movie.
It doesn't get better than this for me when it comes to just all of the elements talking to each other, and just really, I wrote in my notes yesterday when I'm talking about the cross-cutting, and when Nora finally looks up and sees the sampler, I wrote, I'm fucking giddy, and that's how I feel. I feel giddy when I watch this movie because it is just such a cinematic experience where I'm just like, look at how all of these elements come together to tell me this story, to take me someplace else. That weird sensation that you get when you're watching this, when Carruth has been playing music throughout so much of this, and then he'll stop the music, and you just feel this absence, right? It's just like, you just broke me out of this hypnotic spell, because it feels like this movie, I said before, like, people, when they talk about this movie, they talk about how it washes over you. I think it's that music and that editing style that literally hypnotizes you as you're watching it, because you get the drone and you get the little pieces being added to the drone, and will change tempo a little bit here and there. But the edit style also keeps you involved in that. When he'll stop that music, you're just like, whoa, he's like suddenly shocked out of it. And you're almost like, no, bring back the music, bring back that feeling. And then he'll slowly start to reintroduce it again. And it's just like, this is great. I'm so happy when I watch this film, even though it's super traumatic. Like we talked about the trauma at the beginning. I talked about how it's so horrific at the beginning, and then the loss of the pigs is another horrific. I mean, it feels like a setback, right? Like when you think that you're starting to get better, and suddenly something will trigger you, and you suddenly start to feel really awful again. And sometimes, like you were saying, Jim, for no reason. You're having this horrible day, and you're really angry, or you're really upset, you're really confused, and you're like, where is this coming from? And that's the feeling. It feels like there could be something happening, so far away that is making me feel this way. You have to own that, but it's just like, what is happening to me? It's that setback. And then finally we start to get back on our feet, and we take charge of things. And like I said, when she makes eye contact with the sampler, and you're just like, she has taken control of her situation, it's such a feeling of elation that comes over me. And a lot of that elation comes from, look at how beautifully this film has been put together.
And that music changes as soon as they stop being lost. Once the music becomes so active and shift speed, it stops being wind chimey, like blown around away kind of sounds. It's like suddenly like dump, like a heartbeat, dump, 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 dump. And they're like, oh, they have focus, they have meaning, they have purpose. They're like getting on with it, and things are going to get better. And it's like, yeah, it's such a powerful shift when that last chunk of music kicks in.
I always get goosebumps, and it's now my ringtone.
When she sees the flower underwater and keeps grabbing it, and every time she grabs it, she gets new flashes, like new stuff is coming back to her. How liberating is that?
But I don't want to end on this note, but I'm just so mad that Shane Carruth turned out to be... I watched this and I'm like, God damn it, why'd you have to be an ass? Because this is only your second movie, and I wanted more. I really did. Like, he had... I believe The Modern Ocean was a script that it might be out there, isn't it, Mike? I think it is.
I think it is. I didn't find it when I was doing my research, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
People were saying like that was like one of the best scripts they ever read. Like the actors who were, going to sign on for it, but for whatever reason, it didn't turn out to be. And it's just really sad that we'll probably never have another Shane Carruth movie, but I'm glad we have this one.
Out on archive.org, so feel free to grab it. And I think you can probably even download the whole thing.
I'm pretty okay with this being it. Like I said, if this feels like it's such fertile soil, it doesn't feel like an end. And given that he fucked up things in his own life, I'm fine with him not having had the chance to fuck up his filmography.
Like that band that puts out the one perfect album and then breaks up.
Yeah, like it would be amazing, you know, it'd be fantastic to have Kurt here, or he could have gone and become a Las Vegas lounge singer. You never know. It's this, as I said, this is such rich, fertile soil, and you can just a brief skim over what people have written and thought about this. It's clearly like people have like sown some seeds in this soil and it has grown for them. And that just is beautiful. And that is more than you could ever hope for, with one film, let alone a whole filmography. So it's like, yeah, it sucks, but also like it doesn't feel final or hopeless. You know, there's so much here that will keep growing and expanding in people's hearts and minds and helping them to like find their path in their art and maybe even their own life and in the world. And I think that's the most important, powerful thing we can take away from it. And it's important to remember all those other aspects, and as I said, denying them denies part of what this film is about, but the positive is where it ends. And that is a beautiful, positive note that we can keep close to our hearts forever.
Well said. Now that's the final note you want to end on.
And with that, we're going to take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized, so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Return of the Jedi. From the desert fortress of Jabba the Hutt to the Death Star of the Galactic Empire to the forest city of the Ewoks. This is the climactic chapter in the Star Wars saga. Remember the Force. Rejoice in the triumph. Return of the Jedi. Rated PG. Now playing at a theater in your galaxy.
That's right, we'll be back next week with a very obscure film called Return of the... Is it Jedi? Jedi. Yeah, I think that's right. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts Ben and Jim. So Ben, what's been keeping you busy, sir?
Just working away on Apple TV's The Dispatcher. God knows when it'll turn up, but it looks like it's going to be pretty good. A bit of Australian, like, gothic crime, something or other. And just pottering away in my letterbox as usual. You can find me on Letterboxd at Dissolved Pet. And I'm on Blue Sky now, so you can come and see that. I'm like rejoining the social media world and establishing my worm connections. Dissolved Pet on Blue Sky as well.
Very cool. And Jim, how about yourself?
Well, I wear many hats, but in addition to continuing to work on a documentary about mental health in movies that I would like to get done within the year, we'll see. I mainly host a monthly podcast called Directors Club, which is now over on Substack, where I kind of keep everything readily available. So my reviews, my writing, music, pretty much all things me is now at directorsclub.substack.com, or you can find me on Letterboxd and occasionally on Blue Sky and Instagram under Jim Laczkowski. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. And Jim, thank you for joining or rejoining today. Appreciate that. Every donation we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.